Tuesday, March 5th, 2013. Chaos erupts in the streets of Raqqa as tens of thousands of soldiers pillage the city. With no air support in sight, the Free Syrian Army were left to fend for themselves. Now, of all the stories told of the infamous Syrian civil war, none have scratched the surface between myth and legend, like the story of a group of Free Syrian Army soldiers taking arms on rooftops. Join as we explain the current events of the Syrian civil war. In this episode, we'll be discussing the current state of the conflict and any paths moving forward.
Mr. President, you've lost control of large areas of Syria. The jihadist group that calls itself Islamic State has emerged. There are perhaps 200,000 Syrians dead, millions have lost their homes. The UN envoy, Staffan de Mistura, has called this the most serious humanitarian crisis in the world since the Second World War. Has Syria become a failed state?
No, as long as the government and the state institutions fulfilling its duty toward the Syrian people, you cannot talk about failed states. Talking about losing control is something completely different. It's like if you have invasion of terrorists coming from abroad, and the government is doing its job in fighting and defending its...
The Syrian conflict has been ongoing for over a decade and has had a devastating impact on the country and its people. It has also had far-reaching consequences for the region and the world, and it is important to stay informed about the latest developments in the conflict. As many of our listeners may already be aware, the Syrian conflict began in 2011 as a series of protests against the government of President Bashar al-Assad. These protests quickly escalated into a full-blown civil war, with various factions vying for control over the country. In the years since, the conflict has seen numerous military campaigns, political negotiations, with various outside powers also getting involved. Recently, there have been significant developments in the conflict. In the north of the country, Turkish-backed rebels have been fighting against Syrian government forces and their Russian allies. This has led to an increase in tensions between Turkey and Russia, and has also raised concerns about the potential wider escalation of the conflict. In the south, Israeli airstrikes have targeted Iranian-linked forces operating in the country. This has further complicated the already complex conflict, as Israel and Iran are long-standing adversaries. And in the east, the Syrian Democratic Forces, with the support of the United States, have been battling against the remnants of the Islamic State group. While the group has been largely defeated, there are concerns about its ability to regroup and carry out attacks in the future. In recent years, the Syrian government, with the backing of Russia and Iran, has made significant gains against the opposition and has regained over much of the country. However, pockets of resistance and fighting still continue, particularly in the northwest province of Idlib and in the northeast near the border of Turkey. These areas have seen particularly intense fighting, with the Syrian government and its allies launching a number of military operations in an effort to retake control. The conflict has also had a significant humanitarian consequences, with millions of Syrians displaced and in need of assistance. The United Nations has described the crisis in Syria as one of the worst humanitarian disasters of the 21st century, with widespread suffering and destruction throughout the country. Many Syrians have been forced to flee their homes and have been refugees in neighboring countries, while others have been internally displaced within Syria. Efforts to find a political solution to the conflict have been ongoing for many years, but lasting peace has yet to be achieved. The United States, Russia, and other international actors have been involved in various efforts to bring the parties to a negotiating table, including the establishment of the US UN-led peace process. However, the process has been slow, and the situation remains volatile, with ongoing fighting and a lack of trust among various parties in the conflict. Despite these challenges, many Syrians remain hopeful that a peaceful resolution to the conflict has the ability to be reached. Despite these developments, the conflict remains stablemate, with no clear path towards resolution in sight. One potential path forward could be through potential negotiations, such as the United Nations-led peace talks that have been ongoing for several years. These talks have brought forward various factions in an attempt to find a diplomatic solution to the conflict. However, progress has been slow, and the talks have faced numerous setbacks. Another potential path could be through the international intervention, either through military action or economic sanctions. However, such actions carry their own risks and complications, and it is unclear if they would ultimately be effective in bringing out a resolution to the conflict. The conflict for international intervention has also raised concerns about the potential for a wider escalation in the conflict. The lasting impact of the Syrian conflict cannot be understated. The conflict has led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people and the displacement of millions more. It has also faced far-reaching consequences for the region and the world, including the refugee crisis in Europe and the spread of terrorism. The refugee crisis, in particular, has a significant impact on the region, with many countries struggling to cope with the influx of refugees. As we continue to follow the Syrian conflict, it is important to consider not only the immediate consequences of the conflict, but also the potential long-term impacts. The Syrian conflict has been a complex, multifaceted crisis. Finding resolution will likely require a combination of political negotiations and international intervention. However, any potential resolution must also take into account the concerns and interests of all parties involved, and must aim to minimize the potential for further escalation in the conflict. In conclusion, the Syrian conflict remains a pressing issue, with significant developments and challenges continuing to unfold. It is important to stay informed with the latest developments in the conflict and to consider the potential paths forward, including the potential for political negotiations and international intervention. One potential path forward is through diplomacy and political negotiation. This could involve efforts to bring the various parties from the conflict to the negotiation table in an effort to reach a peace settlement. This could involve international mediators or United Nations, and could include the establishment of a transitional government or the creation of a new political settlement. Another potential path forward could involve military intervention by a coalition of international forces or by individual countries. This could involve the use of force to protect civilians or to try to defeat one or more of the parties in the conflict. However, the use of military force carries significant risks and could lead to further loss of life and destruction, and is not a guaranteed solution to the conflict. There are also ongoing challenges that will need to be addressed in any solution to the conflict. These include issues relating to the reconstruction of the country and return of displaced persons, as well as the need to address the underlying political and social issues that have contributed to the conflict. Additionally, there will be the challenge of addressing the humanitarian needs of those affected by the conflict, including providing assistance to those who have been displaced and providing for the basic needs of those who remain in the country. Ultimately, finding a resolution to the Syrian conflict will require the commitment and cooperation of all parties involved, as well as the support of the international community. It will likely be a complex and difficult process, but it is important that efforts be made to find a peaceful and sustainable solution to the conflict. In conclusion, the Syrian conflict, which began in 2011, has been a complex and multifaceted conflict involving multiple parties and interests. It has resulted in significant loss of life, displacements of millions of people, and widespread destruction. Finding a resolution to the conflict has been challenging, and there are numbers of potential paths forward that could be considered, including diplomacy and political negotiation or military intervention. However, there are also ongoing challenges that will need to be addressed in any resolution to the conflict, including issues relating to the reconstruction and return of displaced persons, and addressing underlying political and social issues. The lasting impact of the Syrian conflict and its potential repercussions for the region and the world are significant and will likely be felt for years to come.
you.